I'm going to call this meeting to order. We will be joined by S. Lisa momentarily, and I think that puts us at a quorum for voting purposes. This is the April regular monthly meeting of the Housing Advisory Committee of the City of Charlottesville. Welcome to all of you. We should have been distributed both an agenda, some supporting materials, and the minutes. So you should be in possession of those things. If you can, that was provided by a link via the Housing Advisory Committee general email. So if you could turn your attention to the minutes, if you have them, and review them. We have gotten a couple of comments of some less than perfect congruence on the hack distribution email list. So we may have to do a little work there to make sure that members are actually getting email, etc. And we'll get some sort of housekeeping going to get that cleaned up. But it looks like a couple of folks have made notes about that. But I'll get with Brenda and Aaron to try to clean that up. Of course, I can't say, well, all of you who are here obviously got the notice. We should be ready to get underway. If somebody could start reviewing the minutes. The bulk of this meeting today will be taken up by a review of the draft land use map, but in the meanwhile, we'll get our housekeeping and general update out of the way to begin with.
Chair, I move that we accept the minutes.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Fine, moving on. Good to hear. Okay. Let's see. So first, before we get into the land use subcommittee discussion of the Charlottesville Plan Scale Draft land use, do we have an update on current programs from the city and any updated news there of a general nature?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. The big news is that the budget, both operating budget and capital budget for 2022 was approved by the City Council. So everybody is here and we'll be looking forward to the next year. So that's the good news, you know. And then of course, there is a Recovery Act for which the city will be getting some funding, but at this time, we don't know how much is going to be, but definitely the city will be getting some funding from Recovery Act. The budget approval is a big item, you know, at least it provides a measure of order and reduce pressure on staff that we have a budget for 2022. The other item we need to provide update. Of course, you have it on your agenda. It's the comprehensive plan update. Right now, the consultant is working on putting the draft, you know, together, which is currently under internal review and also committee review, which you guys have the land use piece, you know, and in the next few weeks, it becomes a public document for public review and feedback. And hopefully HAC will provide, as always, a good feedback, you know, back to the consultant so that in the end, we have a quality document. It may not meet everybody's expectations, but at least for majority of folks, is definitely with the feedback going to address some of the concerns that folks have. So we'll be looking up to AHAC in terms of your review process to provide a constructive feedback to the consultants. So that's some of the update on the city. And also, you guys may have read that we have a new deputy city manager for racial equity, diversity, and inclusion that will be joining the city, I believe, on May 3rd, of this year. So we're looking forward to having her join the city's team. So that's the update I have, unless Brenda has something to add. Brenda, are you there?
Yes,
Okay.
I don't have anything additional to add.
Okay, all right. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. All right, if that takes care of that, and we've taken care of the basic housekeeping, and I believe that we've managed to post the minutes and the link and the supporting docs in the chat. Anthony, sir?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if I could ask Alex a question real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thanks for that update, Alex. I was just wondering if you had any idea about specific uses for the, you're talking about ARPA, like from the recent relief bill? Is that what's expected to come to the city?
Recovery Act.
Okay.
Recovery Act. Yeah, it's good you asked that question. That was my question this morning to the city manager, the same question, in terms of restrictions,
Right, yeah.
I understand for this particular Recovery Act is less restrictive than the previous stimulus bill. I think we have up until 2024, to expend the money. So that's good. It has a lot of flexibility, but we're expecting perhaps a clear details, by May 15th, but in terms of what and what all not, according to the city manager, is less restrictive, and we have a much further timeline to use it compared to the previous stimulus.
Right. Thanks, Alex.
So we'll keep you guys posted. No problem.
Sounds good.
Chair, Chris Meyer, I just have a question for Brenda on progress towards hiring a John Sales replacement, the housing coordinator. If there's been any progress on that she can share. I think it's been a while since the position's been, he left, you might say.
About what I can tell you is we're still working on it.
That's it?
That's it.
All right. Thank you, Brenda.
Any further general city questions? If not, I was going to move the baton over to Lyle and for a discussion of the land use map. Hopefully we've got now in the comments, we have published the link that will pull up the agenda, the minutes, the slides on the use map and the use map. And there we are. So I will hand this over. Now, in general proceeding, we're going to try to keep this as sort of conversational as possible. I'm going to try to keep my eye on raising of hands, etc., while Lyle drives the bus here. But just if you do have a comment as we're going through, please do raise your hand and I'll circle to you as quickly as I can. If I don't see you, please just shoot a direct message to me and I'll do my best. And with that,
Beautiful. I'm setting up a maps to share so we can look at it. There's some descriptions in there of what the various land use categories are, how they work, sort of broad scale. This was already looked at by the Planning Commission recently, and I know the consultants are actively working on updating this based on feedback from Planning Commission and others. So I wouldn't treat this as definitive, but this is the now. This is what we've got to look at for now.
Are we being joined by them at some point in this meeting, sir?
That was my understanding.
So I'll be happy to promote the consultants. Is that the request?
Are they here? If
They
are,
are.
please do. Yes, they are. I see them now. Great. Thank you. Jennifer, yes. Sorry, Jennifer. You were trying to get my attention. I failed miserably.
They should be all coming on.
They can probably tell you about their work a little bit better than I can.
Great.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Ron Sessoms with Roadside Harwell.
Howdy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Phil. I tried.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's no worries. Hey, everyone. Nice to see y'all. Yeah, we're happy to walk through this. Probably at a pretty high level. I think you all are pretty familiar with looking at this type of map. So sometimes when we're talking with folks who aren't so used to it, we walk through it at maybe a slower pace, but we can try to go through it fairly a little quicker, and then you can all stop us if you have some questions. Does that sound good? And then there could be time for discussion. Great. I just want to make sure everyone has met Ron Sessoms. Ron is with RHI. He's been with RHI for a while and then left us for a bit and came back, and he's an urban designer and planner. Has worked in Charlottesville a bit previously as well with us. So we're really glad to have him here, and he will be walking through things. Or do we have the ability to share our screens?
You do. You should have the green button at the
Okay.
bottom.
Okay, great.
Okay, so maybe I can share. Well, we could, it looks like Lal has the
Oh, okay.
map pulled up. I think that would work. So I can jump into things. So what you can see here is the future land use categories that we've developed.
Not seeing it.
I don't actually see it.
Let's see.
You see that?
There we go. Yes.
There you go. Thanks.
Let's see. I don't see the screen now.
Oh,
It's blank on my end.
Yeah. Oh,
There you go. Okay.
Oh,
Here we go. We're ready to go now. So you can see here, this is the draft map that we developed for the Planning Commission meeting that we held in late March. And on the left, you can see we have a series of future land use categories. We have 9 kind of core land use categories that range from downtown core to low intensity residential. And I'll just quickly breeze through those. The downtown core is the city's central business district, and it is currently the highest intensity developed area within the city today. And we do see that being the case in the future. It is an employment, civic, and commercial hub of the community that will continue. As far as future development, we do want to highlight the potential to have more residents that live closer to the city's amenities and those employment opportunities. So that's something that we highlight here, is that we want to encourage more residential mixed use development in downtown where possible, and with building heights that range up to 10 stories. And I will caveat all of these building heights that we mentioned in all of these categories include ranges and up to. So not all buildings, we're saying, in the downtown core should be 10 stories, but where it allows, we could reach some of those taller heights such that we can increase the density within that district. Second to that, we have the urban mixed use nodes. Those are areas that include the dark purple on the map, which is located along the US 29 corridor, the strategic investment area just south of the city. Again, we think that these areas can support downtown and continue to support the city's employment, commercial, and housing needs at these locations. Include denser developments such as apartments and office buildings with ground floor active uses such as retail, and buildings in these districts can range with up to 10 stories as well. We think that these areas have a great deal of potential to include some substantial density. And then we have urban mixed use corridors. These are areas that you see in kind of the medium shade of purple or pink rather, that extend from the central business district out towards those mixed use nodes. Again, these are areas that we think could have a higher concentration of employment, commercial, residential uses. And in these areas, we're recommending building heights to be on average 5 stories, with 8 stories taller buildings at intersections to give some diversity of the building typologies and urban form. Next, we have industrial mixed use. This will be along the Harris Street corridor where we already have industrial activities, and also along the River Road area. We're envisioning that these areas can continue to include light industrial, light manufacturing uses, makerspace type activities, and also include other mix of uses such as residential and commercial development. Buildings in these districts can allow up to 6 stories as a maximum at this point. From there, we have neighborhood mixed use nodes. These are concentrated areas that can become walkable, pedestrian friendly neighborhood centers. Again, these would include a mix of uses from residential, commercial, and office type development. Differing from the urban mixed use corridors and nodes, we're imagining the neighborhood mixed use nodes to be smaller scale buildings, more neighborhood scale and appropriate, with building heights ranging up to 4 stories in this area. Of the mixed use nodes, you can see some of those darker purple areas along the East Market Street corridor, Carlton Road area, down south of Monticello Road, and etc. And you can see those areas on the map. And then we also have mixed use corridors, very similar to how we have included urban mixed use corridors. But again, in the neighborhood mixed use corridors, these are smaller scale neighborhood scaled buildings. Oftentimes, these areas along these corridors have lots that are much smaller. They're shallower. So buildings in these areas could range up to 4 stories, we're thinking, and then 3 stories at constrained sites. Again, the sites along these corridors are generally narrow. We want to make sure that we're including buildings that are to a residential scale. And I would like to mention as well, at the last Planning Commission meeting, we heard a lot about the building heights. And that's something that we're going back to take a look at. We've heard, particularly for the mixed use nodes, mixed use corridors for the neighborhoods, that perhaps up to 5 stories should be something that we should be looking at. So we are taking a look at that. But at the time, these were the categories and heights that we were recommending. High intensity residential uses. These will be your apartment buildings, apartment complexes. At that time, we were ranging the building heights up to 4 stories. Again, at our Planning Commission meeting, we heard that perhaps that should be up to 5 stories, and that's something that we're taking a closer look at. These residential high intensity residential areas could also include ground floor activating uses, but the primary uses on these sites will be residential. And then medium intensity residential, this would include your row homes, townhomes, small multi-use buildings, that are more of your house scale. We envision these areas to have a higher density, but fit into the character of a lot of these existing neighborhoods. And at the time, we were ranging the heights up to 2.5 stories. Again, in the Planning Commission meeting, we heard that perhaps we should be looking at more 3.5, maybe even 5 stories in some of these areas. So again, that's something that we'd like to hear your feedback today on all of these building heights. But that's what we've heard to date. And then we have low intensity residential areas. You can see the majority of all of the the existing single family neighborhoods within the city fall within this category. And we do want to increase density within these areas. So we're recommending 2-unit and 3-unit residential development in these areas, which could include ADUs where appropriate. And again, buildings ranging up to 2.5 stories at that time. We heard perhaps maybe 3.5 or beyond, maybe a more appropriate height, but that's something that we're continuing to look at and receive feedback on. So that's kind of a breeze through of the land use categories. I know many of you may have questions that you may have related to each one of those categories or particular areas of the map. So I guess from there, I'll kind of open it up to everyone to see what questions or concerns you may have regarding the future land use categories.
I might note one quick thing before we jump into questions, if that's okay. So as Ron noted, we're taking into account the feedback we got from Planning Commission. We're making changes to this map. A few things I just wanted to note. In addition to heights, which we are sort of considering, some of the comments we got, Planning Commission were, along US 29, we've got the urban mixed use node. And so we're thinking how we can be a bit more, pull out some existing residential areas within that, especially along Mickey Drive, for example. So not including that within that nodal area, but pulling that out as a residential area. You can see on here, within the Harris Street industrial area, it extends a bit further up, further north than we meant for it to originally. So we are pulling that down, and we're creating sort of a buffer zone there with a mixed use area. And then the other thing I think is really important to note on this, and Ron, I'm sorry if you said any of this and I'm just,
No, it's
saying
fine.
it. We've got on here the proffered open spaces, these sort of public, private sort of feeling open spaces. And we've removed those from the map now because in some cases they were not always open spaces. Sometimes they had, in many cases, larger apartment buildings on them that just were not reflected necessarily in the data. So it's cleaner to just pull them off. So you might see some cases where it should be high intensity residential, for example. So just wanted to point those things out.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
And I think in terms of processes, just raise your hand and the chair will call on you.
Not. So it appears that we're all clear on the land use categories. Okay, as defined.
Dan, if you're trying to talk, it looks like we can't hear you. Sorry. Chair, I have a comment. I'm sorry, I can't see everybody's.
Right. Go right ahead, sir.
Okay. Excuse everybody. Excuse me, everybody, if I'm out of order. But and thank you, Jennifer and Ron, for this excellent presentation. Can we, leave that screen share up? But I just, yeah, I would reiterate and appreciate the Planning Commission's observations on increasing building height. I do think I would agree with those observations and the various different land use categories that building further up is probably necessary to help us, again, at least my understanding of ensuring that we have supply of housing. We need better use of the land we have, which is constricted. I was also making the observation, I wonder why in some neighborhoods like the one I live in Price Springs, why the medium intensity residential wasn't further following the main arteries, like on JPA Extended and Harris Street. I also noticed going up from northern downtown that Park Street area on that artery there is not also medium intensity residential. And I guess would hope to see kind of, again, it seems like some arteries were tagged as that and some weren't, and I'd like to see better consistency around that. And then, yeah, I'll stop there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So perhaps a general comment you could speak to kick off the sort of a focus of this group, which of course is the affordable housing piece of this, is that what in these decision-making processes in high density, medium density residential, but really across most of these categories, what is the calculus for how this has an impact on affordability of housing, the density, how it gets used, and how we can leverage it, and to what extent your process has taken that into account at this point, and then how we can look at that as opposed to what we're doing now, as opposed to what this will do.
Sure.
In your best 2 minutes on that.
Sure, a tight 2 minutes. So the land use, and I'll start, and then Ron and Lee Einsweiler is also on from Code Studio. I'd invite either of you to join in, but we coordinated closely, as you all know, with HRNA throughout the development of the Affordable Housing Plan. And so the land use strategies here are based on their main land use recommendations around soft density, which here we've sort of split some of those soft density pieces between low intensity residential and medium intensity residential. And the other piece that they talked about with land use is the multifamily by rights, allowing that in additional areas. And so that falls within the medium intensity residential piece as well as the high intensity residential piece, and through those mixed use zones as well. So our goal was to provide space for both of those recommendations to play out. And so one of the recommendations they had related to soft density, for example, was to look at showing that across the whole city, basically allowing an increase of units, some of those soft density pieces. And so we've reflected that here with, our low intensity residential is really redefining what low intensity residential would mean for the city. So we feel like that aligns with what was in the Affordable Housing Plan. We also are here looking with providing some, allowing for smaller types of housing in all these different areas, hoping to not only allow for additional rental opportunities, but also additional homeownership opportunities. And all of these are tied not only to the land use map, but also heavily tied to the other recommendations in the Affordable Housing Plan, the financial pieces, the subsidy pieces, the policy pieces. And so we've tried to identify ways that all of those can play out through this map, if that makes sense. I might have gone over my allotted 2 minutes on that, but happy to elaborate or clarify.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, let me pull this stuff back up. I'm sorry, I'm having all sorts of problems today, but first of all, thank you all for joining us, and thanks for your explanation. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I had 5 primary comments. Some of them are small, kind of place-based in detail. Some of them are a little bit broader. The first is I think the changing of definitions from R1 to low intensity and medium intensity residential is a really good step in the right direction. I think everyone supports soft density, so we really appreciate that. I do think that that how this map lies does still continue to crystallize patterns of government imposed segregation and exclusion. The lowest intensity areas are still the most of the neighborhoods that were restricted with racial and religious deed restrictions. And so my perspective is that we should push the envelope a little bit on that. The 2.5 stories, I don't think that gets you anything at all. You can't build a 2 or 2, for example. So if you want to create a up-down duplex, as is really popular with a lot of builders, you need at least 3 stories if one of your stories is subgrade, and probably 4 stories to create a 2/2. And so I would encourage anywhere where it's 2.5 stories to increase to a minimum of 4. A small comment up on one of the things that we looked at when we updated the comp plan in 2013 was intersections, critical intersections with the county, where there are places that that could be jointly planned if only the land use were a little bit more intense. And so, for example, up the little sliver up on Rio Road, the city side of Gasoline Alley, there's a ton of really good neighborhood scale and also potentially regional development potential there. But you probably want to mirror what's happening, what could happen on the county side with what happens on the city side. It may ruffle some feathers because there are some existing church, some existing residential units. But in terms of good planning, I think you want to show that as a higher intensity of use on the city side to mirror the county. And then I haven't scrubbed this, but I would suggest any other place where there's that intersection of potentially an opportunity to create a node where the city and county meet. You should look to do that. The biggest comment I will make is that I still think this is really Euclidean in nature. It's still very much use-based. And so if you look at the map, this is very different than the dialogue I heard in the prolonged public comment period leading up to the first aborted effort to update the land use map, is that there are use deserts all through the city of Charlottesville, and it's not good in terms of walkability, livability. And so even though the intensity of what's allowable and what has previously been mostly R1 and R2 has gone up in terms of residential use, it doesn't allow other uses. And I know Kurt Kiesecker, when he was on the planning commission, was working on a proximity map essentially, and looking at complete places the way we look at complete streets, and said, look, if you're not within a, if you don't have enough rooftops and commercial activity within a certain amount of proximity, you're gonna continue to drive car culture. And I do think that even though we've increased intensity here, we've calcified car culture here. And so I would strongly encourage the planning commission and the consultants to go back and look and see where there are single use deserts, and see where there aren't nodes in the middle of them, or lines, essentially places along major or bigger roads that may be residential in use now, but probably ought not be. And so I would strongly encourage that. And finally, this is probably more of a zoning code than a land use map issue, but just creating mineral density is not going to, it may soften some of the pressure on affordability, but in a place as landlocked as Charlottesville, where real estate pressures are so strong, unless the zoning code is proactive about advantaging affordable housing, you're just going to get more unaffordable housing where unaffordable housing exists now. So I would strongly encourage as this moves from land use map to zoning code, that that the zoning code be very, very specific about allowing additional density, additional allowances such as setback, et cetera, lot sizes, in exchange for deed restricted affordability, not just to increase density. So again, to summarize, I think this is still very Euclidean. I would really, really push the envelope in terms of creating multiple uses in more of the city, because this will crystallize car culture. It also crystallizes existing patterns of racial exclusion and segregation. So I would encourage to look at doing something a little bit different in some of the areas that are low intensity and medium intensity residential, particularly in areas of town that have had historic racial deed restrictions. And then look at some of the nodes that could be created where the city and the county connect. That's it.
And what is thanks Dan. We'll take we'll chat about some of that. I want to note a couple of things in response. Rio Road, we are showing it as neighborhood mixed use corridor. So I just wanted to make sure I understood. Would you suggest we bump that up? It's hard to see because it's under the line, but it's a light purple right along Rio. So would you suggest we bump that up, or does that scale?
I was misreading the map. That
No,
I
it's hard to
can't.
see. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I was reading that as low and medium intensity residential, but you say underneath the arrow is purple.
Along Rio, yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you got it right then.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was something we considered as well. We definitely sort of looked at the county land use and how we can make it align with the city land use, given that it really takes a special person to know exactly when you cross the line between the two. I think it's pretty rare. So.
Great. Well, thanks. I'm sorry. I withdraw that that comment. Thank you for clarifying, Jenny.
Sure. The other thing I just wanted to note, a point taken about wanting to make sure we're addressing, I think you call them use deserts throughout the city. And so we have noted here that even in these residential areas, ground floor active uses would be allowed. It says in select locations. I think we're figuring out if what that would mean, but we wanted to both allow opportunities to identify nodes, but also leave an opportunity for more organic node development. And that came out of discussions with the steering committee, wanting to allow communities to sort of create themselves where they wanted to create those nodes. But like I said, we'll take a look and see if there might be other opportunities to place those designated nodes in these areas.
I appreciate it. I think one of the things that the Planning Commission, after I was on it, came up with was gradation in colors rather than dark colors. I mean, if you see a future, look at the Greenbrier neighborhood, for example, or the JPA neighborhood. If this is what is published as the future land use map, people are going to have a certain assumption, and probably rightfully so, that low intensity residential is going to stay there. But maybe there's some way to indicate that there's future conversation about creating nodes within this area. I don't know how you do it without the map being live,
Right.
with blinking lights or something. But they were trying to get at it with shaded or notes or comments or something like that. So anything that you could do that crystallizes that idea of identifying future nodes, I think would be really, really welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, Chris.
To take the floor again, but getting to one of Dan's points that it made me think of things of where there's potential county connections is where Stribling meets the county line that runs parallel to Fontaine. That would be, I think, there's potential development around there and connectivity issues and there's at least currently potentially a large development going in that would increase a lot of density around there, and it might make sense to think about how that is upzoned to medium or maybe high residential too, considering it's also its proximity to UVA.
So that's just south of the rail, south of JPA?
Exactly. It
Got it.
basically runs parallel to the west side of the railroad. Where
Right,
the
okay.
railroad comes out. Thanks.
We'll take a look at that.
Mhm.
One other, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry, Phil, one thing I note is you'll see in that presentation, if you looked at that where we walk through a slide with a little bit more description of each of these areas, we had photos, precedent images, and we appreciate the Planning Commission's comments that we need to adjust what we're showing, and we need to, I think, strike a balance between recognizing that Charlottesville is a really historic context. We want to show examples that are from Charlottesville or the area when we can. And, I think where we can show examples of how new development or redevelopment can blend well with the Charlottesville context, we want to make sure we're showing the best examples of that. So this is sort of just an ask of you all, if there are particular places that within the city or in the county, neighboring areas that you think really align with the type of development you would like to see within these different land use categories. I'd welcome any thoughts from you all, not necessarily on the call, but any thoughts that you have about places we should be looking at for those precedents. Sorry, it's just a side note.
Dan, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, so we pulled out precedent images last go round, and precedent places. Altamont Circle was one, because of the mixture of large scale residential development and low scale historic development that works very, very well. That needed to make that work would also be an update to the further update to the standard design manual, because it's the skinny streets that makes that work and the smaller setbacks. But that was one that was a street that seemed to have gotten unanimous consensus that was what we would like to replicate around town. And in terms of mixtures of uses, we don't have a whole lot of that other than downtown Belmont and surrounding areas. And I know that there are some conflicts in uses, but if you can think about that in terms of nodal activity and residential activity, those would be two places that I would start: Altamont Circle and downtown Belmont.
Thanks, Dan.
There's a lot of criticism for West Main, which is unfair in my view, but there are some good examples on West Main as well. Not to build up your egos.
I'll toss in one more. I just wonder, Ridge Street neighborhood doesn't really have a node for anything. And getting to Dan's kind of point about mixed use, there is a housing authority property there, and it's being redeveloped. And what can they walk to? Basically, kind of would be my question. And so, is there considerations of some kind of needed mixed use a little bit closer that could service that neighborhood? Because at the moment, and getting to Dan's point, you probably need to jump on a car, and the bus service at the moment is not that frequent around a lot of that area.
Thanks. We'll consider that.
Yeah.
Jennifer, has any thought been given to infrastructure needs to, particularly in these areas that are being upzoned, and in particular public infrastructure that would need to be paid for by the city? Yeah,
we haven't had detailed discussions with utilities folks and whatnot. They have been involved in we've talked with them early on in this process. One thing we've done in the text of the plan, in the chapters that you'll be seeing when they come up for review, is to note specifically that as development does consider there needs to be an examination of existing capacity, not only with utilities and infrastructure, but that includes schools and whatnot. So we have not had detailed discussions with them about these exact locations since they are still in flux, but those conversations will be continuing to happen.
I would say that's a big issue on Stripling, for example, which could be potentially upzoned, but the infrastructure is just not adequate.
Got it.
Mhm.
All right, any further comments on this piece of it? Uh, Lisa? Yes, Lisa? Looks like you had your hand there for a second.
Yeah, I did. I just have a question in terms of Charlottesville's history and ensuring that we are always considering equity and not repeating our history. Are you all familiar with technology, a mapping technology that it's called mapping inequality, where it shows you in real time the overlays of your city or whatever area you're working with of the previous historical wrongs or redlining? It deals with redlining. Are you all familiar with that interactive mapping system where it shows you in real time? And its purpose is for this, it's for zoning.
I think I am, yes. I think I am familiar with that. I would say we haven't, because Charlottesville did not have the, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but because of my understanding, Charlottesville did not have a Hulk map or a redlining map because of its size. But there are racial covenants that we're well aware of. Sorry, do you disagree, Esley?
I'm pretty sure I saw a map. And it may be, I'm referring to a book that I read that highlighted a map. It may have been a map that someone created, but I'll look back on it. It's dealt specifically with the redevelopment of Vinegar Hill. And it talked about the redlining in Charlottesville, how the culture left Charlottesville through that process. But any technology, in addition to just looking at a flat map and making assumptions, unless you have that racial overlay throughout all of this, because that's a thing that keeps coming up. And to pay homage to that in the proper way, that should actually be on this map so that we don't continue to perpetuate those wrongs. So where is that highlighted on this map? The redlining. Do you not think that that's something that you all can put in here?
I think that follows on to Dan's comments and some of what Sunshine, I'm not sure how much of Sunshine's comment Lyle was able to push out there, but that this map does on the lower density is essentially, I don't want to say endorsing, but that's not right, but further sort of baking into that cake that's been there on this. If it's not literal redlining and that HUD didn't have a map, at least the philosophical redlining, and that these lower density areas tend to be pushed that way. And I don't know if Dan can speak to that a little further or if Lyle's prepared to based on his comment.
I wasn't quite finished. What I wanted to say is, can that be an overlay on the map that we're currently looking at? I understand that we all have this desire to make sure it doesn't happen, but can that be an overlay?
I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about, because I think there are certainly, we've looked at the demographics in the city, changes over time. That's certainly been a piece of what we've looked at. I mean, you mentioned Vinegar Hill. We've incorporated recommendations from the Star Hill plan, vision plan that speak to some of the historic that situation. But you're right, we don't have there's no overlay on here that shows, areas that were previously exclusionary, for example, which we know the areas that have been outlined through the research project, the racial covenants work that JSAHC is doing. And we've met with CLIC earlier this week to talk with them again about this, because we know there is a desire to see some of those parcels that had racial covenants directly sort of marked for much higher land uses than a mix of use to allow more people to live in those areas.
You understand what I'm saying? If you don't have that visual there as a reminder, it's easy to continue and to perpetuate these same norms, because you always have the situation where people say, yeah, that's great. Affordable housing is great, but not in my neighborhood.
Sure. Can you elaborate on what visual? I just want to make sure I understand what visual you're thinking of. Are there, you said there was a specific map.
The best example would be if you Google mapping inequality, it's an interactive map.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Where it shows previous redlinings that if you're a city and you're focused on that, you should take that into consideration when you're doing zoning. So my question is to always have a lens of equity and inclusion. Is it possible to have that? And it may be answer, maybe no, but I'm asking it. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to have that as an overlay of the map that we're currently working with? So we have a visual, this is a visual map. So is it possible to have that other overlay on there?
So the answer is no for that mapping inequality site that you're talking about, because they don't have a Hulk map, which is what they demonstrate on there. But the local research project they've got with the racial covenants, we've got that map that was included, as you may recall, in the steering committee meeting. That's not completed yet. So the reason we're not showing that as an overlay is because the entire city, as it is now, has not yet been studied. There are neighborhoods that used to be in the county and now they're in the city, and so they're being looked at now. To see what
is it possible to do partial of it, or what we know of?
We include it not as an overlay, but we have it in the presentation that we've used and that we'll keep on using. We could look at ways to show an overlay, but I think we would want to look beyond just that racial covenants piece to see if there were other locations, as you noted, Vinegar Hill, other locations that have been impacted by policies like that.
For the record, I'm very supportive of that. I think that would make this unique among comprehensive plans, and it may not be specifically an overlay unless there was a transparency, but a separate map that sort of shows that the correlation between existing patterns of zoning and racial exclusion in whatever form, I think would really hit the mark in terms of what we heard from folks as we were going through the process originally about being proactive about undoing purposeful acts of racial exclusion. To that end, I was hoping I endorse Lisa's idea. To that end, I was hoping Sunshine had asked me to sort of read into the record his comments, and I don't know if they actually made it. Are they up for people to see, or should I go ahead and read them, Phil or Lyle?
I think that Sunshine's comments overwhelmed Zoom's messaging capability, which doesn't speak to their profundity, just to the volume and format that they were in. But if you could maybe just sort of give, I think it probably makes sense for you to at least bullet point them in so that we can all get them clearly.
I think it's worth it because Sunshine is part of two of the subcommittees that are intimately involved in this kind of work for the HAC and for the city. So Sunshine Mathan, who is the ED of the Piedmont Housing Alliance, writes, the current iteration of the map overprivileges existing patterns of development, thereby maintaining historically established segregationist patterns of wealth and access. The sequence of work, affordable housing plan, and comp plan, and rezoning is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to confront the map of our history and chart a future Charlottesville that reflects our aspirations in this moment in time. The mapping process must reflect a courageous effort to redress past harm and maintaining exclusionary zoning by deferring to existing low-density neighborhoods, particularly for neighborhoods who have benefited financially from this exclusionary framework, simply reflects the status quo. Please reorganize the proposed residential land uses to remove exclusionary protections for historically privileged neighborhoods while also protecting historically lower income neighborhoods from gentrification, whether by remapping of the proposed resident land use categories or recalibrating the density levels in the proposed residential land use categories or compressing the residential land use categories from 3 to 2 or some combination of the above. Lastly, strongly consider an affordable housing overlay category that overlays all future zoning types throughout the city such that affordable housing solutions are privileged by 1, removing the need for rezoning for affordable housing developments, and 2, providing sensible by right increases to density, FAR, height, etc. for affordable housing projects. Thanks, Sunshine May.
Would it be possible for someone to send those to us?
Absolutely.
I tried to take notes. I'm not.
Not a problem. So I think that dovetails nicely with our prior conversation of the affordable housing plan and the use of and it's the relationship between the needed code audit and rezone and how to sort of pull in this by right notion of the affordable housing overlay. I think that all, I think Sunshine, even in his absence, has sort of summarized that very well. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sunshine. So. Anything further? Members of the public, I'm trying to scan. Sir?
Yes. Responding to S. Lisa's comment, which I also agree with and think makes sense. So we didn't do HOLC maps, but we did our sort of homebrew exclusion through time, which produced a lot of maps. There's a 1929 segregation map. Oh boy. There's the housing plan that produced the Vinegar Hill project. That's Harlan Bartholomew. Also our first comprehensive plan. That was the beginning. As well as just the history of single family zoning, which has been consistent through time, going back to 1929. I'm happy to share any documents needed on those.
Yeah, I think we've got some of those. I think pulling those together into one map is a start to show, and then we can figure out if we pair it with this or if there's a way to make it some sort of overlay and still make it all readable.
Or we can put them side by side so that we can see them at the same time.
Definitely needs the visual to be a part of this conversation, a constant part of this conversation. Otherwise, you're asking individuals to just imagine what we're trying to present. And this is a beautiful visual. So let's also show the previous historical redlining. I think that collectively we can find that out, that information, and make that resource available.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, this is something we've thought about a lot, and it's a part of the whole presentation we've been giving with this, but I understand what you're saying, wanting to have it closer to the map. So we'll work on a way to do that.
Jennifer, I've sent Sunshine's comments directly to you in their entirety.
Thank you.
So further questions and comments along this line? Other thoughts for next steps for evaluating this? Can you folks give us an update on your timeline for your update?
The plan is to have a version that we can circulate for public review in a variety of ways, both virtual and in person, some pop events and whatnot by the end of this month, going into mid-May. So we hope by the end of next week to have a more detailed timeline that we've sent out to our email list and whatnot to all the different stakeholders that are involved. So yes, by the end of the month, I guess I would say.
So I assume from that any comments, further comments on this event, substantive comments, you want them basically right now or as soon as possible.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I thought Frank was about to jump in.
Actually, I am going to jump in. And this is really a question. I'm not sure for whom, might be for Dan and or Sunshine. The concern over gentrification in the existing affordable areas, I think, is a legitimate one. And even if we eliminate these sort of boundaries in the kind of existing wealthier areas to affordable housing, I think the fear is that existing affordable housing areas will be targeted because the cost of redevelopment is less expensive. And so I'm wondering whether any thought's been given to how we protect those areas that are currently affordable, and how you avoid just through the natural economics of redeveloping higher income areas now, which are already more expensive. How do we foster more affordable housing in those areas? I realize that's a mouthful, but
Well, yeah, I mean, particularly since we're already off the rails in that category, right?
Brandon, I wasn't on the Click call. I know that was a topic of conversation at Click. Can you elaborate on that?
It was, you know, I think what they're doing is adding some kind of narrative to look at different pieces of the city and saying, you know, these different areas, while they're marked the same kind of density or intensity, that, you know, there needs to be particular policy and zoning attention to these different neighborhoods. I was interested in, could you show that on the map? And it sounded like that was a no-go. But this is a hard question to grapple with. And I'm not 100% confident that we fully have a handle on that. You know, what's going to protect neighborhoods from gentrification while still being able to offer, you know, some ways to improve affordability, maybe have some more, but then also in, you know, say Greenbrier and you know, Dairy Road, you know, how do we encourage the creation of affordable housing, because simply allowing more density doesn't necessarily mean you're improving affordability. So there's policy that's got to be attached to all that. And I feel like that's a big sort of missing piece if you're just looking at a map. And, you know, that's about all we can really do right this second, because these are really difficult questions without really fully developed policies that go along. But I would be interested in seeing some kind of indication for these different areas of, like, you know, such and such area really, while the intensity is going to be about the same, we need to sort of designate that as a protect against gentrification zone and designate these other neighborhoods as this is where we want to see more affordable housing. There's a lot of contradictions involved in all of this, and finding the policies that are going to work is going to be really challenging, I think. But I think it would be good to be able to indicate that on the map.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is really complex. I don't know of any magic policy bullet for this. I mean, if you think about it, if you take Frank's question and you extend it to its absurdity, and let's say you upzone the rest of Charlottesville and you keep 10th and Page low intensity residential, then you're going to get investment for people in single family homes. You're going to drive that investment into 10th and Page, and you're going to increase those property values in a way that could be deleterious to the families who live there. I think it's a lot more of other kinds of policy tools. I don't know that I'd want to see like a historical preservation overlay over the low income neighborhoods, because now you're eliminating the possibility for wealth creation among folks who live there. Jenny, are there best practices in the industry that do deal with this desire to protect historically, sort of naturally occurring historically African-American and low-income neighborhoods while you upzone the other parts of the city?
It's something where, and I know Lee might have some thoughts on this too if he's still on, but we, there are several places in the US that are looking at this exact same thing right now, or they have recently, looking at our single family areas and what we want to do with them. And so, I think it was Lyle shared a good example from Portland, where they did an analysis of sort of what are the areas that are most at risk, and how, can they protect those areas. I think they may be looking at a demolition delay ordinance or might have one in place. So we are looking at, and that's something we've heard. I mean, this is something that we continue to hear a desire for, and which, as Brandon noted, is not, needs to be tied to policies. It's not something, we can't show everything on the map or else the map is illegible. But so there are best practices we're looking into, but it's sort of a moving target to figure out how impactful they are right now with this specific type of looking at land use change for single family areas.
Yeah, it's almost as if it's in the context of there are these areas that we seek to protect, and when we start using that language and and think about policy decisions there, it's almost as if you're pushing those areas already into a defensive crouch. And in that way, it's kind of, even if just conceptually, it seems to be exclusionary in the opportunity to leave areas behind from development in general. While we're sort of up against trying to come up with tools that allow for diffusion of affordable housing to other areas, again, I think that there are so many moving parts on this that are policy driven. Although it'd be lovely to figure out a way to visualize it, I'm sort of struggling with how that would look or how you approach that.
Well, one thing to note, and this is maybe semi-related to what we've been talking about, is we've got these different categories of, for example, there's a low intensity residential category, which allows for single family up to three unit, at a sort of a range of heights. In the zoning, there will be several categories that likely address this land use category. It could be broken down. There could be places where it would not be appropriate to have, based on lot size or whatnot, might need some restrictions on numbers of units or size or whatnot. So some of these will be broken down more granularly in the zoning, and I think that can allow for potentially a bit more discussion of, are there ways that we can break these out so that if they're at-risk neighborhoods, that we can build some protection for them through that. But, I mean, this conversation that we've gone through today is exactly what we've been grappling with this whole time, wanting to protect neighborhoods, historic African-American neighborhoods, others that are, potentially at risk of gentrification, while still allowing opportunities for wealth building and, not completely killing all chance of development. So I'm not saying it's a dichotomy. We're just trying to figure out the best balance there.
This is Trish. Yeah, I get concerned about the unintended consequences. We do talk a lot about wealth building. You know, when you start putting restrictions on things, right, doesn't it, to a certain extent, sometimes reduce the ability for wealth building if you're the existing landowners? I mean, upzoning would make their land worth more potentially, right? I mean, if in different policy contexts. So yeah, it sounds like a very delicate dance, and I'm not gonna say I got the answers, but I mean, maybe there's many communities making the decision at the moment, but I would be hesitate to, potentially to trying to look at equity, what are we reducing their ability for wealth creation as an unintended consequence of maybe putting something on here? I think that's already been said, but I just want to reiterate, I think that's a consideration that needs to be taken. Thanks.
There are a lot of communities out there studying this and who have found solutions. And I think we need to delve deep into the research to find out how it is working in other communities. And it may be something that is out of the box in terms of a policy. And always, we also can consider subsidies for when we're talking about different people being able to qualify for different things. So let's think outside the box and let's dive deep into communities outside of Charlottesville who is making this work.
Well, I want to note to that end, and I appreciate you. I remember during the affordable housing plan process, you pushed us to think outside the box as well. And so those policies that are in the affordable housing plan are living now in the comprehensive plan, and they are tied to these areas, and that includes things like tax relief, so people can it's not as much of a threat if their property value does rise. Includes things like homeownership assistance, both in terms of access to information and to funds. It includes rent assistance for tenants. So I think there's a lot already in that plan that's set to be implemented along with the comprehensive plan, and that needs to be tied to all of this. And maybe it does need to be noted below the legend or something. These policies from the housing chapter, which now is where the affordable housing plan will live, are tied to a lot of these areas. I think there are ways we can make note of those policies that need to be taken into account when this map is implemented, even if we can't list them all on the map itself.
Lyle, you're muted.
So I was saying such wonderful things too. We've got a new section on implementation that sort of talks about how do we actually get what we want out of this plan. And I think that may be a really helpful area to get at this nugget. And maybe it's a small area plan, maybe it's additional studies, additional engagement. I don't know, but that there may be solutions there.
We do. You said we have a section on implementation.
That we will.
Comprehensive plan will have a section on it.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. I was sorry. I was so eager for the next step forward.
We wanted to have discussions about the map itself and the strategies prior to fully developing that. But that's as we got feedback on the chapter text, the goals and the strategies within the chapters from staff, we requested information that will feed into the implementation plan, timelines for development of for achieving these different strategies and whatnot. And that's for all chapters, not just for housing. And so those will be used to build out the implementation chapter. But I think within that chapter, there also will be a prioritization of some of the key ideas that, in the next 5-10 years need to really take flight to make this successful.
While further pieces of this you want to call to our attention, you having taken the closest peek at it?
My main concern overall, and I know we're not there yet in analysis, is sufficiency. Does this deliver the goals and objectives of the affordable housing strategy? Which I think we're at a hard maybe, but I think we're going to get a more clarity.
Any further comments on the current discussion here from any of the panelists or members of the public? I don't presently see any. So to the consultants with us and to the hack in general, would it be useful for us to synthesize and funnel comments to the group in the next few days here of any further thoughts we might have? And if so, Lyle, I'm assuming you would love for us to send all of that to you.
I would love that.
Forward on.
And happy to answer any questions that I can offer from the Planning Commission's perspective.
Makes sense to do. Sort of send further thoughts on to Lyle to synthesize and send on and forward on. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Sorry, I don't know if was that a question for me. You cut out a
Well, it's
little bit.
question for the
me. I
hack
can-
in general.
Okay.
I beg your pardon. That's a question for the hack in general. I'm asking the hack in general. If that makes sense for us to do so that we can sort of synthesize our commentary here and put that forward and get it into the hopper to the extent that there are further comments we need to make.
I'm okay with it.
Okay. That's all we're getting endorsement. Right. Any further thoughts here? Anything else we need to discuss on this map? I know we've taken up, we've had the consultants with us here for a full hour, and that's about as much a constant staring at a map as most brains can stand anyway.
Oh, we'll be staring at this map for several more hours today.
Wow.
But I would just note if, any comments you all have, it'd be good to have them as soon as possible. We are trying to wrap up this week so we can then review with staff the revised map. So appreciate all your comments on today. And I know we'll have, we'd welcome any other feedback you have on the next iteration that comes out as well.
I want to thank Jenny and Ronald for attending today and for throughout the process. I feel like you all have been really super responsive and engaged and gone above and beyond probably what you're being paid for in terms of outreach. So I just want to thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Second that. Okay, thank you very much. Is there any further other business before this committee that we have to deal with at this point? Is there any further public comment at this
Chair,
point? Yes.
I just have a question on whether UVA has expressed any interest or we reached out to UVA. I'm going to ask this at every meeting just because I'm interested in UVA actually engaging us or participating in this or in another space, I guess. Has there been any word from them or any recent outreach to them? Or I guess could someone from the city ask them to attend if we haven't?
So I'm going to turn to Ridge, who has the fairly close association on that side. If is working with their housing group over there, if he has been able to raise that point.
I raised that point, have not gotten a response, but this is a good prompt to raise it again. I mean, they are, focusing on their affordable housing promise that they made last year that got sidetracked like a lot of things by the pandemic. They are re-engaging in that effort, and I will make it a point to say that part of that re-engagement should be to have somebody participating on the hack. So I will take that on so that Chris, next time you ask, we'll have a really good answer.
Well, and Ridge, I'm not expecting it to be your responsibility, you're going to be the spokesman or anything like that, but right, it'd be interesting to have somebody from UVA actually attend.
Yep. I mean, I am on the president's council, for university community partnerships, and this is obviously a hot topic, both at UVA and with us. And so I will. While it's not my role, it's something that I think I can do. So I will try to do it.
Great, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. So, all right. Anything further? Any other further questions? I look forward to the next iteration of this map and commenting on it. And we will look to see what the city requires us for our next meeting. There are no other business we need to handle today, and now the chair will entertain any further motion that might occur to anyone.
Chair,
Like to-
move to- oh,
I'd like to move to adjourn.
Well,
second.
we have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Anyone opposed to that? Okay, we're done. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, consulting group. Thank you, members of the public. Thank you, Aaron, Brenda, Alex.